Hey, it's Chris. My first video filming since being sick with the flu this past like week and a half prior to this. Absolutely and utterly thrashed. I have never been that sick for that long. I kid you not. Like, I've been sick like that two other times in my life, but the peak of that sickness of each of those other times was like a day or two. This was like 5 freaking days of me being completely knocked on my, and not doing anything. Didn't play anything. Didn't even like basically leave the room I was in. It was that freaking insane. Flu just absolutely massively wrecked me. So we'll see where this video goes with the crowdfunding roundup, since I was sick last week and we didn't get to anything. And I know there are lots of projects that launched. I know lots of small publishers, and I'm going to try and cover as much as I can. Truth be told, though, I might tap out a little early on this one. Just it's going to be a really interesting video just from that standpoint, because your boy ain't 100% yet either. So round it up and let's go. The big winner, and I don't really know how to read this any further, but $1.5 million is a huge win if you're Gale Force 9 coming back with arguably, on paper, the campaign structure that I would argue against on a formality's sake. But the approach definitely opening eyes and opening wallets in that regard too. Star Trek Ascendancy, the final frontier, sort of like Mage Knight, the Ultimate Edition, I guess. Maybe, we'll see. And you're getting everything. And the interesting and the alluded to structure that I was just sort of throwing some shade at here is they are throwing in 3 brand new factions, not just brand new factions, but gamefound exclusive factions for this game. 2 new ways to play with a campaign mode, and a 2.0 streamlined, not necessary rules either. You can incorporate some of the new rules. You can incorporate none of them. You can incorporate all of them. Streamlined ease of access. Now, I'm not going to go into what those are. I'm not going to be able to give you opinions. I've not played Star Trek Ascendancy. And so more aficionados are literally breaking down the rule books over on Board Game Geek, saying their thoughts, pros, cons, and otherwise of some of these differences that they are highlighting that are making it significantly, quote unquote, question mark, different than how it is at baseline. The major one being streamlined, get it played more, changing some of the strategic options, even changing some of the startup options to get the game going easier. Again, does that help things? Or if you're streamlining, if you're revamping rules that much, there are some echoing concerns that some of the previous factions and their, mechanical approach are either going to be held in check even further or going to be, well, just completely taking over Borg style. And that's what I don't know. And I guess it reminds me of the Richard Garfield quote that I saw a couple weeks ago. His quote was, "Hey guys, there's no such thing as perfect asymmetry, perfect balance, essentially." And that's where I go. A lot of that is player to player pendant. And if you like that, or you do the League of Legends system thing, right, where they ban a couple of these, you sit down with your group of 5 people, you got your 10 civs, everybody gets to ban collectively 2 civilizations from the game, and then everyone else chooses from the rest, right? Like, great. 3 new civilizations, though. And the issue that also is very intriguing with that is, these are $50 a piece factions, essentially, to get this new reward expansion content level. Now, it is giving you a few other things if we pull this up here. A 2.0 upgrade kit, the campaign kit, as well as the ultimate storage solution, and the Civ mode, whatever that is. But that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for extras from that aspect. You have to love this. This is, it's sort of like Firefly, if you will. And I just am intrigued to see how many people are actually down here at the $400 level and the $500 level. And that $500 level is the thing that amazes me, folks. Absolutely amazes me, because, it reminds me a little bit of like Everdell. When people saw like the complete collection, they sold off their collection, bought the complete collection for slightly more. I haven't seen that on the secondary market. Then again, I've been out of it for, the last week and a half, hallucinating and, sweating through my shirt on a nightly basis. But you have 1,500 people spending $500 $500. Now, you know, those are CMON rookie numbers. Got to pump those up. But joking aside, for a non-like super heavy miniature based crawl-esque game, that is an absolute freaking metric ton of money for a pledge level on a game like this, right? The last thing that made me think of anything like this high for this amount of people doing it was Marvel Dice Throne X-Men and missions, right? And that comment section on the pre-painted miniatures is, woo, dog, that's a whole nother conversation too. But is this the one to get in on then if you are a thematic incorporated 4X person and you love some Star Trek? That's what you're doing. That's what this is for. And I can't say it's for me. This is a game where I would say, above all else, for me, right? I would never have the appeal to pick it up for myself. But this is a game I would also just, you know, love to be over at someone's house and learn how to play and have them teach me to play from that, you know. The game that you want somebody else to own, if you will. Again, nothing bad to say about it. Second edition upgraded kits are all there. NPC stuff, solo, multiplayer. I have no idea. Borg have evolved, civilization enhancements, so like things that they're going to be changing apparently based on some of that. And so maybe they're already accounting for faction changes that need to be taken into condition. So I can't give you anything further, but man, this is intriguing because I look at this and I go, if these are that good, right? If these are that good, then are they really going to be able to get them elsewhere? I mean, this isn't even like a generic statement of, well, maybe in our retail web shop later. It's, you know, straight up gamefound exclusive. So I would love to see if that changes in the future. I'd love to see it. I have no idea, though. No stretch goals. What you see is what you get, right? Not getting anything for that $500. Anyway, how much is that shipping for that $500? You know, let's see. Okay, you're supposed to get it, you know, in a year. That's a lot, but okay. Yeah, $35 for North America and $45 to $60 for Europe. And that's, I mean, still, for the amount of content you're probably getting for $500, proportionally, I guess shipping's not nearly as much as I thought it could be. But there you go. Star Trek freaking Ascendancy. Is that surprising to you or not? Then Flat-Out's back, getting a cool $142,000 at this point with 2 games in the lines of the previous Point series and a little bit of another card-driven combo game, Propolis. So Point Galaxy is going to take a spin on the other Point situations you've seen in terms of Salad and City, and it just does it with a space theme. And you're again drafting 2 cards from your tableau, about 18 of them, drafting 2 on a turn, putting them into your own create a tableau, if you will. And what you're doing is you're creating these little solar system columns, and they're going to be populated by these planets, and the solar systems themselves are going to give you unique ways of like scoring additionally, but otherwise it's going to be a sum totaling of points that's going to go along with these runs that you're going to have, because what you'll be doing is drafting them and then placing them, but you'll be allocating them to either the top or the bottom of the piles depending on if you have numerical values that will fit those, because if you don't, you may have to start a new one. And so you go and you do this over 13 times, 13 rounds, trying to draft, maximize, rinse, repeat, and profit. You'll be getting other things like moons and meteorites and those sorts of dilly-dallies to get additional combos along the way, more of another set collection of a different style. And then also some of these cards will have rockets that will allow you to get other various benefits going along as well. Endless possibilities. Is it going to be one of those games where you've seen all the cards every single time and you're starting to meta it? Because the rulebook mentions the fact that the end game is triggered also like on that last round when you can't refill the market enough. So not sure, probably not a big deal whatsoever. Propolis has got a little slight worker placement area majority combo card driven twist here, because essentially you choose a bunch of your workers to send them out and put them on these spaces in these rows. And the color of the space that you land them on is the resource you're getting. And you just move your resources up the tracks and you gather them, and then you use those on the subsequent phase of things to pay for these structures. And then you go until somebody builds all 10 structures, and there's a queen card because it's a bee colony, and you can only have one of those in your tableau once per game. But the tricky point with this is you have them standing up and then, you know, kind of flopping to their side. And flopping to their side is called fortifying them, which means that you get their resource a second time because you place them, then you get to fortify 2 of them, then you get to spend your resources. But if there is, at the end of that sort of, you know, mechanical phase approach, Not sure the exact timing of where it falls, but I think towards the end of your turn. And then at the end of your turn, you look and you see, do all of these cards have at least one worker on them in the row? And if they do, then you count up how many workers are there, with those fortified ones also counting as double if they're flipped over, because then this is the tricky point, right? You get the opportunity to take back as many of your workers as you want on a turn. But if you control the majority in a row in that situation, you get to take them all back. And so that's going to be the interchange dynamic and tension that it's mentioning and it's going along with. So of the two of them, actually, I wasn't expecting to say this before looking at this whatsoever, because Point Galaxy thematically, and even I'm not a huge fan of Point Salad. Point City was okay. I actually look at this and I prefer Propolis. I just do. And that's not what I was expecting to say with this, especially with all the landscape cards and the structured cards and, well, the pseudo worker area situation I just mentioned. So yeah, there you go. A little bonus tokens and a few just extra cards. And I'd actually just rather have the extra content there. So yeah, even the stretch goal makes me feel more comfortable from that sense. So what are we getting extra? Well, just Point Salad down here as well. That's it, flat out though. 150 grand, and that's what you're getting. And let's put out a good product, and no surprise. Flat out games, flat out killing it. There we go. The next one is one I'll be covering very shortly as well, and it would have been out earlier if I wouldn't have been sick. Anyway, Fame and Fable. I actually reached out to Owen. I came across his game, like I'm Board Game Geek, and I love the artwork. He's like a professional designer, illustrator, so got a huge pedigree. So again, the art is absolutely fantastic on this. Got almost $200,000 for a game you probably didn't even know was coming to crowdfunding. So it's quest management, monster battling with hand-driven card combos, if you will. A little bit of strategy, a little bit of push your luck. You have a limited number of actions on a turn-by-turn basis. As you slowly summon, draw, use actions, or, you know, summon them routinely on a turn-by-turn basis, these enemies, and you have to do sort of the Regicide-esque meets combo-driven card kill your monsters gameplay. Because each of these cards is going to require a certain amount of attack to overcome them. You're going to be drafting allies, items, and other accoutrements from the market, as well as fulfilling quests to become the legend. And each of these things are going to give you fame points that are going to move you up along the fame tracker. And, you know, the system that you're somewhat already familiar with, as you take the amount of actions to draft a card into your hand, you can only have 6 of these allies down total in front of you before your tableau is considered fulfilled. And then you cannot play anymore until you get rid of some of the ones that are in front of you. And there's various ways to do that, including if you can't defeat the monster that's in front of you. And then what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using them, utilizing their number or their strength of their attack versus the ability of the text on the bottom of the card separately. You go back and forth around the table until someone crosses the champions level, essentially, and then the game ends. A few other little tidbits in there that change the scoring dynamic. But the other aspect that is slightly different with this, there is going to be some take that. There are going to be a few other vigor abilities going into the ally situation as a whole. And so it's going to be something slightly different action tableau, but it is going to be some take that too, because the card example that they use in the rule book mainly is like of the assassin. And you can spend, 3 to recruit the assassin into your hand. Playing them from your hand to your tableau is free, but then attacking is free. And the assassin's attack is 2, and it either has like weapons or poison that it can be used for. And so some creatures may take more damage from poison. They may be more susceptible to weapons, or vice versa. Or they have the ability at the bottom, and this is where it can use 1 of your additional actions to then cause an opponent to discard one of their own allies, which could be helpful, because the other useful catch-up mechanic that goes along with a card-driven combo system like this, because of the real ever-present threat of a runaway leader, is that if you move your, point tracker far enough up the track, scoring-wise, right, you may pass a moon token. If you do, you take that moon token. And when you take that, everyone else gets to refresh all of their allies. Because otherwise, it's like a Magic the Gathering tap-style situation. And then, like I said, you go until someone gets the most points, you do a few endgame scoring things, and you see who, well, won in the end. Solo mode as well. It's expensive for what it is, right? Indie game, deluxe edition, gonna get $68. So, I mean, yeah, that's not, cheap by any means. But if you want just the regular version of it, $38's still pretty freaking decent, especially from an indie. You're not going to pick it up elsewhere, probably at retail style of things as well. So, wowzers! Vanguard, what do I get for that? This gets you a custom ally designed for you. I was just saying, you know, like a couple weeks ago, I need to find a game to get me like a promo in, right? Like I see all the other crowdfunding campaigns for like Dice Tower and Man vs. Meeple and Board Game Geek and Game Boy Geek, and I'm like, man, you know, Legion Games Pro. Anyway, sorry. But I will be covering this one. I will have a separate video out for it. The rulebook is on the page, a couple videos as well. And yeah, so I'm not surprised. It's got a great vibe going on. And I will tell you more of my own personal details and thoughts in the very near future. Fame and Fable. Then Falling. I briefly talked about this one in one of the either news roundups or my games that I just recently played like in December or so. And, you know, they sent it to me to talk about, and I talked about it a little bit. It wasn't my total vibe, but it was also a lot better in a different way than I was expecting. And so when it says stuff down here, like it's not something I've really seen before, it's not really something I've seen before. Because essentially what you've got is you got your own little action card tableau system, again, that you're managing, because you draw these cards on a round by round basis, and they're dual purpose or dual use, and you choose which side of both of these cards you want to use, and then you use that to build your engine for that round. And your workers are going to be rotating through these levels that are going to be, well, dropping down essentially. Like you have them and they just fall down. And so your workers may start off at a higher level and then they're going to go down to the next level. And so as you place your workers on these spots, you actually have to move your main part of your board up on the tower on the left side. And that determines where you can place your worker along the row. And those row spots are all going to have things that you can fill and get resources in some various way, shape, or form. But as you're placing those off, it's also going to take things off of your own personal player board, which is then also going to be used on a round by round scoring basis, depending on how many you do not have filling in a large number of those areas. And so you do this over several rounds as the board game state shifts and these levels go down and down and down, because when that bottom level falls off, that's when your stuff returns. And if your stuff returns, then you're getting less of those points and resources that I just mentioned that are so important in the first place. So it definitely has a thematic incorporation there. And I was really impressed by the gameplay from that aspect. So, you know, don't believe me, go check out Cardboard East. So right there, right there, right there. You don't even have to listen to me gush on it. It just isn't my overall type of game that I play on a lot regular basis, because as weird as this sounds, with those promo floor tiles, you know, I like that they're including a little bit of a stretch goal here, because that was the one thing I kind of saw that I was like, okay, well, some of these floors are just the same. And so having some variability, having more just changing there as well is really good. And then it gives you an advanced game mode as well, because some of these characters will allow you to change your engine build with some asymmetric powers that you have the choice of at the beginning of the game as well. So here are the floor tiles that you can kind of see, and these are the ones that are going to fall and rotate. So two different types of them that are going to be rotated between the different supply cards here. As you can see, like you choose one side of them to choose on a round by round basis. And then the guild cards, again, doing same things, allowing manipulations in ways that you may not ever have access to based on the floors that you're on. So there you go. Again, killing it. I think they said they were sending it over to Capstone too, and the rulebook is on the page. So yeah, give it a look-see, and we'll see where it goes. But overall, again, $39,000. That's killing it for a Japanese game. We don't see a ton of those, so congrats. And yes, next up, almost $400,000 going back to the tiny dungeon style of things with the Adventures, a new campaign mode, a couple new mechanics to go along with this tiny epic dungeon crawl, essentially, is what this is. And it's not only giving you a deluxe version, it's giving you new expansion, it's also making it completely standalone. So if you don't have the previous one, this is the better one to go in on. If you have the previous one, well, you can mix match and get the miniatures and not make it any more tiny than it already is in the first place. And so, again, 41,000 people the first time around, 2 million the second time around here. So we'll see what this entails and what it ends up being. Now, they've gone back to a little bit of the gonna get it later outside of the crowdfunding campaign with this one. I don't really know how much of that they're doing recently, although they say, you know what, we are going to run out of stretch goals if you hit enough money, because we can only make the box so big. We're choosing to make the box so big, so that's what you're going to be doing. You can get, like I mentioned, the optional miniatures to go along with this, and they're giving you more of a spiral-bound notebook that you then surround by the cards as you slowly reveal the dungeon on a turn-by-turn basis in this cooperative dungeon crawl and making up to a 7x7 grid in a 2-phase system where the first phase you are exploring, fighting minions, disarming traps, fighting other enemies along the way while trying not to run out of torchlight, run out of rooms to discover before finally reaching the lair of the dungeon in the phase 2 where you then have to defeat the boss in the first place. It's giving you a new little mini expansion, and with the deluxeified version that comes with this one, there is actually gameplay content, and so it's not one of those that is solely just a non-gameplay deluxeified version of things. They run you through a couple of the new mechanics here: bombs, keys, fairies in a bottle, right? Things I didn't think I'd be saying out loud. Got a little reference to Zelda there. Night lamps, explorer packs, the adventure book, which is your campaign, ways to continue, and then they break down the dimensions in case that matters to you. A little bit of pictures, a little bit of all the heroes that you're going to be getting, and all of the different rooms, tiles, spells, attacks, weapons, secret envelopes, and continuation campaign things to go along with it. A little bit of a closer look at some of the enemies. I mean, the big question with a game like this, right? It's not that it's going to be like super outstanding, the best dungeon crawl you've ever played, but are you willing to give up some of that overall awesomeness for ease of accessibility from a literal size standpoint as well as a rules standpoint? That's what they're doing. That's what they've banked on. And again, like, I see a little bit of conversation all over the place in terms of which ones are the best and which ones aren't. And I think the last 2 or 3 have been relatively more well received than the 3 or 4 before that. So, I think Galaxies is still hands down one of the best ones. But I think Adventures here, with the spin-off of Dungeons, I think Dungeons is actually one of the higher rated ones too in the last 4 or 5 years. So again, are you willing to pay a little bit less for a little bit less, but a little bit more in the same way? Is essentially their business motto with this one. Breaks down the expansion content, and it breaks down the deluxe content here, the mission mat, a little bit extra tokens, a dungeon book, and I mean, that's what you're getting, right? Stretch goal stuff starting to be included, so you're getting a decent amount there as well, but is that right for you? Is the mechanic actually right for you? Not just the size, not just the footprint, not just the rule book, everything else that goes along with it. And essentially on your turn, I mean, you take like 3 actions, right? You move, then you take your heroic actions, and then you take as many free actions as you can. The rule book is on the page for the old one here, and it runs you through a little bit of how you're going to be attacking and dice rolling and skill checking, and all of those sorts of things are your special heroic action, including all of your attacks, disarms, and searches. And then it gives you some of your free actions here, modifying your skill dice, revealing adjacent unexplored rooms, entering places, researching, and doing those sorts of things. The key limitation, like I mentioned, is you have this torch that you're going to be slowly moving along this track, and if it reaches the end, i.e. you run out of enough light, then you lose. If you have to place a 5th goblin, essentially, on the board right here, resolving them as you go along, then you also lose. So if you can't do some of that stuff, there is a little bit of a built-in timer, so you have to be a little bit of moving it along more than anything else. And again, enough content out there that I don't think this is an unknown quantity. This is, the small box version of the equivalent of Massive Darkness Shadows of Dungeon Reach, if you will. You knew what you were getting with Massive Darkness 2 with what Hellscape and the previous campaign put out there. It's giving you a slightly different spin on the adventurers, a slightly different spin on the mechanics, and a slightly different spin on the just coming at you standalone as well. And enough people talking about the previous one, you don't even really need the new stuff to figure out whether or not it's for you. It's just whether or not you're going to mishmash it all together or get in on this one to begin with. So there you go, Gameland Games. It'd be interesting to see, especially when you shout $2.1 million on the first campaign. What's this one going to end up like? And is it going to end up anywhere comparable? And again, I don't think that necessarily means might not equaling right. It just means that sometimes people reach their saturation, and even a second 2.0, 3.0 iteration of things can't pry any more money of people who are saturated out of a game already in the first place. Sort of like an Aeon Zen situation for me. So there you go. Then we're going over here to Nanty Narkin, The Rise of Cthulhu from Planix Games. I'm actually an original backer of Nanty Narkin before I knew what I did and didn't like much better. And this was one of my regrets because I played it. It wasn't bad, but it was one of those where I just said, I don't know if I like this, and I don't know if this is a mechanism that works for me. And I just didn't have a clue about what I really loved and what I didn't really love, and I was less experienced. And so it actually worked out really well for me because I ended up trading it for a copy of El Grande, the big box. But it's one of those two that I look back now and I go, would I like that now? I'm not really sure. It's an action-based system where it's some area majority based on sort of old-timey London, and now you're incorporating Cthulhu old ones essentially as ways of changing up the dynamic as anybody can summon them. And you have asymmetric victory conditions with your heroes of Sherlock-esque and villains, if you will, that all give you asymmetric win conditions, or if nobody gets, their asymmetric win condition, by the time you can't refill cards, you go basically based off of victory points total. And that's a combination of having agents down, getting your minions out, having buildings that are summoned or created, essentially, and then the insanity of the old ones is going to be the mix here. It's a card play system where your cards are going to have actions on them from top to bottom that you get the ability to play through depending on how, when, and where you want to play them. And then having these areas that you can control, not only building different buildings, but also with each area coming with a special asymmetric power that you can activate if you were in that area. You can only build or even control these areas under certain conditions, including things that will get in your way, like troubles if people are in more than one area in the first place, which you have to eliminate in order to take some of these actions. So for 125 euros, you get a little bit of a deluxified version of things, and 99 euros is going to get you everything gameplay-wise. So that's actually better than I was thinking, or better than I was assuming going into this, especially with a standalone deluxified expansion. So it's probably on par with a lot of the area control miniature games from a crowdfunding standpoint if you like it. But again, I don't know if this is going to be like the whipped cream and cherry on the top, or if it's going to change the dynamics enough that if you weren't a fan of the base game, I don't think it's necessarily going to do that in this regard with the elder ones and summoning them, because you can basically just chip away at them and take them out, essentially, if the rule book is to be believed. So you do your bidding, you achieve your secret goal, you battle the other old great ones, and you go insanity ramping up things and allowing you to get more and more crazy as the game goes. So again, there's enough info about the base game because this is a 2019 game, so you can look at all these tons of videos that are out there and see if it's right for you. But again, I don't know if the dynamics are going to be that different in the expansion compared to the base game. So we'll see, but it's got almost 100,000 euros at this point, so give it a look-see. Next up, Blasphemous, the board game. 633,000 euros at the time of me filming this from Ludus Magnus. Sort of this cooperative, but then also ultimately only one winner style game. And I'm clicking back on this image because it shows you sort of the end game situation where the person who is the best penitent, which is what your player characters are called, one person fights the boss and decides how well they essentially win the game, if you will. Solve your quests through a multi-day phase system as you go along from place to place, location to location on this central map, exploring, fighting, and questing. And some of that is going to be dice based because the key feature of this game is going to be dice that are upgradable on the faces of them in the first place as you're going along in order to defeat your enemies. Not only your minions and mini guys along the way, but ultimately the boss as well. And it's going to be a combat system where you have to roll a certain number or combination of symbols to match what your enemy needs in order to be damaged, but also maybe to avoid damage as they're going to simultaneously strike back at you, whether that is a minion or a boss. You do sort of a scenario-based system that is going to be chosen at the beginning of the game, and you go until you get to the boss for the end game. Obviously, you're going to be having gear that upgrades your character and their skills and ability checks as you're going along. Talks about the asymmetric bosses that are going to be there, the customizable dice that are going to make your penitent unique in every game. Storybook is going to be part of it as well, so this is not just a purely adventure along. You're going to be having a narrative component to it in the first place. Let me just pull up the rulebook here before we start talking about the prices. You can see what these pilgrimages, as the quest systems are called, and they break it down in terms of what to expect, the enemies that you're going to be dealing with, the nemesis that you'll be dealing with at the end of the game, the quests and the behaviors that are going to be going along with it, as well as any special rules. So you can get a little bit better glimpse of what your character is going to be set up like with their asymmetric skills, the board itself, and then a little bit as we go along, the generalized game flow here between the dawn and the sunset. But that's the only rule book that we have right now. So if you want to see what the flow actually looks like or feels like, you're going to have to watch one of the preview videos, because although it explains things, it doesn't give me the best sense of, okay, I understand how this is going to be sort of linked together and working. So you really need to go check out one of the videos down below that we'll talk about. It talks about the faithfulness to the video game in the first place, the map being both functional and artistic, the organization that your characters are going to have, including their abilities, their upgraded dice, as well as the exploration that you're going to be doing as you go along with that narrative component that you're reading through, as I mentioned. Combat, I talked about that previously, right? You have the options to match any of these that are either going to do damage, avoid damage, or even run away from the battle in the first place as you're moving through these areas. Resources are rewarded via victories and valuable vestige cards that are going to give you, well, the way to be able to fight the boss, right? In the epic confrontation, you use every upgrade along the way, but it's really only you. The confrontation with your nemesis takes place in the arena, which holds the combat cards when they attack you one by one. So there you go. Rulebook is there that I mentioned. Rules Compendium is probably actually more necessary because, again, like I said, if you want the flow, the rulebook is good at explaining, but not necessarily the flow. Here are all your characters with some of their slight asymmetries and descriptions. This page is huge, so let's go down to the rewards right now. The wash option, and then 300 euros for the all-in stretch goals, exclusive penitent one, and all 5, holy F-balls, Batman, 5 expansions. Well, I guess I'm really glad they're not, like piecemealing the expansions out one by one. And with Ludus Magnus, you are getting a bunch of stretch goals here with a bunch of additional content. But wow, 5 expansions from the get-go. That is crazy to me. So here are the videos and everything else you need to know. But yeah, Blasphemous. Ludus Magnus has a type 2, just like I do. So if you're interested in it, give it a look-see. Then we're going back to CATAN. And I didn't actually realize this was launching when it was supposed to launch. I was going to talk about it in the upcoming news video when I discovered it was going to be coming to crowdfunding, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago now before I got sick. And $300,000 for basically, again, finding another way to bling your CATAN out, as we've seen with every other version reimagined in some sort of deluxeified configuration, essentially. And this is what they're calling the Masterpiece series. So, right? Metal, wood, resin, gemstone. Absolutely unforgettable situation here. So what are we actually getting though? I mean, it looks pretty, but the problem with this is, for me, it would be a showcase rather than a want to play with it style of things. It brings an impracticality that makes Castles of Burgundy, the special edition, blush at this point. And again, if you love it and you're still playing it and you can get all of these other parts played, I think it's ideal. Gemstone and metal ones. I mean, again, like, there's deluxeification and then there's just over-the-top-ish, and that's where we're starting to jump the shark here. Dice are nice, but I think that looks really, really freaking ugly to have the word on the die as well. Just completely and utterly unnecessary. And that yellow die there, when that's put on the table, that looks even worse. You can barely make it out reading what it's supposed to be, so that's kind of silly. I guess metal, wow, that would actually be cool. Again, do you have all of these ones? They're standard and you can replace them and swap them out. I guess that's kind of nice. At the same time, it seems like I don't need all of those. Again, I think these are nice, but you're just choosing each one of them, essentially. Build your bundle. So it's sort of like interior decorating for your board game. Which ones do you want to match together? Again, if people are willing to pay for it, I guess so. And you have a lot of people who are willing to do so. And if that works for you, that works. But it's going to cost you anywhere between, what, $70 isn't horrible for that. But it could also run you $150 or $300 in addition. I think the wood looks really nice. But again, I am also more of a gameplay person than anything else. And they're just giving you more additional options for deluxeification. So take that for what you will. Interesting test of the market. Not surprised it's getting what it's getting. A little bit higher than I'd expect and a little bit lower at the same time. So there you go, CATAN Masterpiece Series. Then we're talking Champions of Wind and Fire. And I swear that this ran and failed. But I'm just wrong, I guess, because I didn't see it on ID Ventures' previous ones. But this is a build your dragon style of things with an I cut you choose dice based mechanism, where you're going to be taking the dice that you choose and either allocating them into your little pyramid here or to the pieces of your dragon to upgrade your dragon in order to win the tournaments, which is what you're building them for in the first place. Depending on your number of players, the number of tournaments you will play, probably around 5 or so in a game by game basis. You roll collectively, one person, 7 of these dice allocated between a certain number of areas depending on the player count. Then you take those dice from that area on your turn from one of the remaining areas that is still available, and then allocate them in any combination between those 2 boards that I just mentioned, collecting the bonuses along one of them and then enhancing your dragon along the other. Enhancing your dragon means that there are going to be 3 pieces of this dragon that you will be removing and swapping out the actual pieces for, both in a simple and an upgraded deluxe manner, if you will, that are going to be ways in which you are going to then deal with the tournament, because each of these then are going to be added up for a total sum of your points of your dragon, and the person with the lowest total points determines which tournaments are actually going to take place, because the tournament is only going to matter to the symbol of one of the elements in combination, I believe, if I was reading this right, the part of the dragon, one of them specifically, and then the combination of those 2 determines who wins the tournament, gets you victory points, rinse and repeat until the end. Some private, some public that you're going to be choosing from depending on who is choosing. Like I mentioned, here are your 3 different tiles that you're going to be replacing as parts of the dragon, each worth different amount of points, and then also having an additional way you can match scoring of those color combination that you're putting on the elemental boards as well. There you go. That's the game in a nutshell. You get a little bit of Kickstarter exclusiveness with 6 additional tournament cards as a mini expansion there. And again, it's a little bit expensive for what it is, but are you willing to pay, $53 for a standard edition, including the mini expansion and the stretch goals? Because I think the stretch goals are actually some additional gameplay content here, if I'm remembering. Yep, it's a little bit of both. Multicolor mage tiles, multicolor magic mini tile expansion, alternative trainer mini expansions, because I think you can have a little bit of asymmetry there, more tournament cards. So again, stretch goals are probably worth it. And so the question is, do you feel like the stretch goals are enough for you to get it for that price, even if you're not going to do the deluxified version, or not? So if you really want to spend over $100, though, you can get a Sky Race expansion, wooden tokens for the Sky Race expansion, metal coins, wooden tokens for everything else, and all of the other things I mentioned previously. So nice little sleeper hit from the folks who brought us Cryptic Nature, if you remember that previous crowdfunded game as well. So that is Champions of Wind and Fire. Now we have Northgard, Uncharted Horizons, the expansion for this Northgardian game based on the video game in the first place. And they say actually on the page that they've sold 40,000 copies of this, which is really impressive for a game that I think has flown under a lot of people's radars as sort of, again, about a 45 to minute 94x style situation as you're slowly expanding and conquering and taking out your enemies in one of 2 ways you're winning. Either you're playing over 7 rounds, 7 years in the game, or at the end of any year, you control 3 of these closed off areas completely with like a building. And so those are the dynamics you're going to be having to keep as you go along and try and, well, just do all of the things you're used to in a 4X style in the first place. On a turn-by-turn, round-by-round basis, you're going to be taking the cards that you have in your hand and playing them in one of several different ways in order to gather your resources, deploy your troops, conquer, move, or anything else in between. As the rounds go on, you will be moving from your standard, regular, easy development cards into your more advanced movements, actions, and cards in order to, well, make the game all more than interesting. Recruiting units, building said buildings, upgrading along the way. It's doing a little bit of everything. And then this expansion is offering you a new modular system to play on top of some of the elements that are there, as well as a few new elements in addition to another solo mode as well. It gives, I think, like 5 or so different clans, I believe, 5 or 6 actually, with different asymmetric abilities to bring your clan to fruition, right? And there's like a squirrel clan, right? And there's dragon and lynx and that sort of thing. I like kraken as well. There's more terrain that's going to change the dynamics of those tiles that you're laying down. More creatures to incorporate into the creature deck. More development cards, as well as a few other alternative winning condition modes, if you will, if you prefer that, in addition to a sea module to give you something more dynamic on the sea, and the solo module that I mentioned as well. So 49 euros, 50 US dollars for this and all of the content to go along with it. And there is a little bit of exclusivity of their game previously, and there looks like there's just a tiny bit here as well with some of these upgraded components. So whole bundle getting you all of the other stuff. The collector's edition, which I think is the previous exclusive edition, can get you a lot of stuff there as well with 2 expansions on top of it. So wooden tokens are the previous deluxeification, and a little bit of an upgrade if you got the retail right there. A few stretch goals, including gameplay content. So, a new clan as well. So they're really hitting some extra content there, and I think this is one of those few games that over the past couple years definitely got more content supported on crowdfunding than it did at retail. And so I'm not sure if that really matters to you, but it's something to at least consider here as maybe the main reason to get it. The rules for the new expansion content are out there. See, I told you, Dragon Clan, Kraken Clan, Lynx Clan. I forgot about the Ox, but look, there's the Squirrel, and they run through all the other stuff. So again, this game's been out for long enough that it's not really a surprise. It's just whether or not you need more of it or you're finally getting in on your collector's edition. So there is Northgard Uncharted Horizons expansion. Now, Alpha Clash, a cosmic conquest of TCG style proportions, as you have sort of a 3x3 planetary grid that's made out at the beginning of the game that you sort of draft out there, and then you have just a 3-person team, one of each of the 3 classes that you move and attack, and you move and attack, and you use dice-based combat system to damage your opponents. First one to get 20 victory points through a plethora of ways wins the game, or you play a certain number of rounds and you run out of time, essentially. Comes with 3 different classes like I mentioned, and then 6 characters in each class just in the base game. And that TCG model that I mentioned, well, if you want to pay $500, all 22 are already taken though, so you can't anymore. And it gets you an uncut sheet, it gets you a cool shirt, and it gets you a 1-of-1 card of some type, right? Right here, unique card signed by some people. It's a lot of money though. It's a lot of freaking money. And the featured pledge level is $150 for this, as well as just $60 for the intro starter set. You can get retail miniatures to go along with it, but it's very straightforward. And what you see is what you get. A few extra factions to go along with it as well. And it's kind of playing off of both these style of things. I think the combat and the gameplay is relatively simple and straightforward. But again, do you want that mixed in with your TCG as you're taking these heroes characters and battling them along the way? So there you go. I'm going to leave it at that, but it does have some few stretch goals as well as some of the more miniature details in case you prefer that versus the acrylic standees. So there you go. Then Suriya, which again is sort of another vibe-ish of the similar ilk, but this has $113,000 with 400 people. That's pretty impressive. And what you're doing here is sort of a deck builder in the same lines of the situation we were just seeing, because you draft these terrain tiles out into the middle. And I don't think you actually draft on the previous one, but this one you do. You draft back and forth in a 2-player mode. And again, you move around, you battle, you take all of the actions that you can on a turn-by-turn basis before finally passing. And these characters are going to be asymmetric. You're going to have action cards that are going to be acquired on a round-by-round basis in order to make your deck different and new. You have to build 3 bases by the end of your turn and have them still standing, or in a 2-player game, destroying an opponent's main headquarters in order to win. Using these cards in a multifactorial way, including discarding them for minerals, using command tokens to issue orders to your squad, and then gathering your income, including cards and resources to buy stuff later on. So again, it's pretty to look at, and it's got a few distinct faction houses that you can combine here as well. Rulebook is on the page, and we get 2 expansions that are going to be going along with it at launch, giving you 2 more additional factions, and a few videos down here for playthroughs and previews, a few social stretch goals for additional content, mostly just a little bit of deluxeified stuff there, and a solo mode. So there you go. What is the base pledge price for this, though? $219 for an early bird pledge. Gets you a dice tray, both expansions, and a playmat. Whew, that is expensive. $119 though for a core and stretch goals. That's a pretty penny, and so I guess that's how it's raised so much money. But if that's interesting to you, give it a look-see. Then Manatee Sanctuary, and it says 1 to 6 players, but don't worry, we've made 2 different color boxes and pieces in those different boxes, so if you want to play 7 to 12, you can, but otherwise the gameplay is identical in how it's going to be going together. You take a hand of 5 cards on a turn-by-turn basis, you do an I cut, you choose scenario where you split them up and then pass them to one of the players on either side of you. They do the same, and then you end up with a stack of cards back, which these cards are multi-use on the top and on the bottom. The bottom expands your Manatee Sanctuary as you're creating these patterns that create, these little flowers in order to house the manatees. The top gets you resources as well as the manatees in the first place, because not only are you going to have to recruit your manatees to your sanctuary, of course, you still have to feed the manatees on a round-by-round basis, play over 3 rounds to score the most victory points based on the sort of set collection sanctuary building, if you will, and then the winner is whoever has the most after those 3 rounds. So indie game, pre-stretch, getting a bunch of little wooden tokens to go along with it. The overview that I just mentioned right there, scoring, phasing, and optional round markers to give a little bit of bonuses along the way to change the game dynamics as you're going along. So there you go. It's funded, Warped Reality Games. They're doing really well so far at $47,000, so give it a look. Then hopping back over to GameFound, Don't Look Back, horror miniature game. I don't know how it's played. Apparently you spawn a bad guy, the bad guy goes. They've got an open world terrain system here that they utilize, and you go back and forth as the NPC, the non-playable bad guy, goes and tries to kill you. You get a group of 4 characters, and you use a D20 dice mechanic to, well, play through the game. So it talks about how you can customize it here, your characters, your plot, your intensity level, the characteristics of the killer, and then the turn of the game itself, and then the phases of this game in the first place: the fright phase, the killer phase, the character phase, where you're doing your individual actions finally, and then if you achieve the objectives, you win. Otherwise, rinse and repeat. Gameplay here if you want to see that, and it says it's the same as the original when it came out previously, and you can get a little bit of expansion content, a little bit of DLC here, 4 new characters, 1 new killer in this one, and then you get a little bit of other expansion here which helps you simulate as a summer camp, which again just gives you more cards to interact with in the environment and to utilize to give some more asymmetry as you're going along. A little bit of bonus stretch goal there. $100 here will get you all the core content and the expansion stuff, $50 of the core, and all of the previous stuff. Holy crap, is that a lot of stuff? You can get that for $745, and there's 17 people doing that. So holy big pledge levels Batman right now for this stuff. And here are all the other additional add-ons that you can do and all the other previous VHS stories that they have. So I mean, it's got a type. People like it. I wish there was a rulebook on the page. I wish there were some more details of the nuance of the gameplay itself to set this apart from a couple of the others we've seen recently in the last year or so that are doing similar horror style things, but hasn't stopped it from getting nearly 100K, so there you go. And board game advent calendars, where you slowly get to unlock pieces of a board game to eventually play the board game by the time the advent calendar is done. Mantic Games, you want Worms, Walking Dead, and more? Well, you can get all of it right here for nice little bundled pledge price if you want. $62 here for 2 of them, and then $121 if you want 5 for the price of 4. So the gift of gaming. It's unique. I mean, it sort of reminds me like renting board games. I guess if you like it, it's good on paper, but I don't know if assembling this over several days would be really what I would prefer to do. I have enough trouble when I have the game all out at once when I've got the game acquired in my collection. So take that for what you will, but there's Mantic, and people must like it because, 30 grand. Last up this week, we're talking about Cannibal World, Fight to Survive, Brutal Dystopian World in an expandable dueling card game, $61,000. Where you have 4 meat tokens. You have 4 actions on a turn-by-turn basis, and you have a list of actions that you can take in any combination as long as you have the ability to pay for them. And unlike a lot of the other games where it says, you have abilities that get reset at the beginning of every turn or at the end of every round, then this one does not do that. You have to pay, potentially, in a way, to get it untapped. Otherwise, they are stuck like that permanently. That's not an attacking situation, because other things that you'll be doing on a turn-by-turn basis, by moving these cards back and forth between the lanes, attacking and trying to ransack your opponent's habitat in order to win, or if you can't ransack their habitat 3 times in order to win, you can deplete them of all of their creatures in any of their deck. Now, that's not to say that they cannot draw more, but they do not literally have anymore for you to be able to actually defeat. And you get these action tokens back after your turn in order to mitigate some of the actions your opponent may be taking in the first place. Now, I mentioned that this is an expandable card game because you are going to be constructing your deck between 15 and 25 cards with a limited number of point system to go along with that, 160 or less, in combination with any number of common cards, but restricted to one of a kind of several of the more rare cards, and having only 3 of those cards in your deck as a whole. And as I mentioned here, we'll pull up the rules to show you what the actions are as you're going along. And this little symbol right here behind it tells you how many of those little action tokens you have in order to do that action in the first place. Playing a card, playing an action card, an ability on one of the cards, moving them from zone to zone, initiating the combat, ransacking their habitat like I mentioned, drawing cards, reviving a stunned creature, and then the actions that you can take on your opponent's turn, including dodging and activating abilities in that way as well. Runs you through the quick 4 factions here: rats, dogs, cats, and rejects. And there you go. That's pretty much everything you need to know. Does that sound good? Let's see what we got going on here video-wise. A few videos down here, and then a few stretch goals as well. So a little bit of foil, a little bit of gameplay. But that's it. So give it a look-see if you want something expandable with a cannibal theme, right? Question mark. There you go. Then we're going overseas with Queen, Luxor, Big Box, Runestones, Big Box. Again, it's a Queen retread of these, well, I want to say more relatively popular games out of the last 5 years. I actually owned both of these. I actually traded them away. I'm actually a little bit sad about Luxor. Luxor is one of the few games I would really think about getting again. Runestones is just kind of this Feldian proportion type multi-scoring salad situation that was fine, but it just felt a little disconnected too as you're gathering these rune stones to complete different ways of objectively scoring as you're moving around and gathering. I liked Luxor as sort of the mummy style, move around, land on spots, grab tiles if you can pay for them, and slowly make your way to the center again as a set collection point salad situation in a completely different way. And I think the price is relatively good for $63. Because you're getting a ton of actual content with the expansions. And with both of these, I'd say that they're relatively worth it. And especially with some of the Queenies that weren't really available because these were some of their first ones and that was their Kickstarter equivalent exclusive, they were a little bit tougher to get on the secondary market. So Runestones is doing the same thing with a couple different expansions and a couple different dynamics there. So I believe, what is it? You play 2 cards and then one of them goes into the discard pile and one of them gets recycled depending on which one is the higher or the lower one, and they're color coded and they get you the gems and you can there's layers there, but it's not something I'm going to go over any further because I mean it's Queen and retreading the expansions like I just mentioned there. And everything you need to know. So, again, well-known, their overseas company, Mowgli, and this is the Queen on the other side of things. So, there you go. Then we have Crits and Tricks, Tug of War, and Thieves of Eldris, the trio from Inside Up Games, giving you 3 different games, all set in the same universe, with 3 completely different mechanics going along with it. Free gifts for all the backers, depending on which game you're playing and how you want to go. So what are these 3 games? Crits and Tricks is a trick-taking game with the use of dice that you're slowly going to be selecting and then matching up to dice in order to change the win conditions on a round-by-round basis. Player screens are going to become valuable in terms of bluffing and hiding the cards behind them. As you're doing this, you assign the dice, you use your abilities to shift the trick into your favor, win the right ones based on a sort of spades situation, and then complete the most quests and get the most loot by the end of the game. Thieves of Eldris is going to be something a little bit different. You set up like a 4x6 grid where you have 3 cards that are face down in front of you. One is represented by your cut purse, which you will be secretly manipulating based on the dice that you're going to be rolling of these cards that are in this grid tableau system. And then on your turn, you get to steal from one of the cards adjacent to you, potentially, depending on where that card is in the tableau or the square rectangle area in the first place. And then you can also potentially choose the other person's cutthroat, and if you do, they are then forced to lose that cutthroat, lose money, get you more money, and potentially have to figure out how to get back in the game and get a new cut person in the first place. First person to 8 coins overall wins in that one. And then Tug of War is more of a battle line lane battle situation where you draft captains and then use those captains to draft recruits into your battle to then place them in the majority of the 5 areas, I believe, that are going to be available to you. But each of the spots only has 2 spots for recruits that you can place down in order to outnumber your opponent. The twist with this one also in the name of Roar, meaning if these cards as you're playing the recruits to these areas have the Roar token, you get to move the Roar token tracker along one way or the other, and if it's in your favor, you start to be able to put down tokens that are going to negatively affect your opponent's lanes in that way. And not only are you going to be having to control the majority of these areas, you also potentially get more victory points if you beat the other person's value by a higher amount. And then you see who wins. And that's it right there. That is what we got going on. I mean, I'm actually a big fan of this Tug of War situation. I thought I was going to maybe be a bigger fan of Thieves of Eldris, but that's not my type. And even crits and tricks, I think, isn't going to be necessarily as high as a trick-taking lover in the first place for me. So overall, clearly Tug of War for me, but check it out. They all come with a little bit of deluxifications as well. They highlight here on each of the individual games, like the little miniature set here, and then Thieves of Eldris. It gives you a little bit of the deluxified sorting cards as well. So again, little things sort of like the all-play campaigns to get you in now as opposed to waiting till later. Last up, Cities of Venus Survivors. No kidding here. Sci-fi dice manipulation set in the original Cities of Venus game universe. Polyomino board as you upgrade your mech. 46 grand is what it's raised right now. There's a lot of quotes that are saying it's a lot of fun on here. So I am tapped out at this point. I am just exhausted. So I'm going to leave this one for you to check out. There is the rulebook right on the page. 13 pages will tell you exactly what you're going to need to do here. First player to get 5 fuel rods triggers their launch sequence in the game as you play it simultaneously. On your little mech control board here, you're going to be having survivors and mech parts, as well as ways to mitigate your dice rolls by +1 or -1, depending on what is available. We hop back over here on the page, and they actually have a 4-player version and a 6-player version. And in case Ultra Deluxe box level isn't good enough for you, there's an Ultra Premium box. 4-layer dual-player boards, 6 dual-layer player boards, marbled core dice, so just more for all of the extra people. No stretch goals though. What you're going to be doing is that, like I mentioned, the simultaneous play with these markers to indicate when people are ready for a round by round basis. Rolling to operate your mech in the first place, determining the path in which you want to upgrade them. Exploring the terrain and looking for survivors via the polyomino laying and adding these crew members for your mech in order to help upgrade them at a later point. I'm leaving it at that. I am completely tapped out at this point. I wanted to highlight this one though, just so it was on your radar, because I think it is doing something slightly different and it's worth a look-see. So there you go. And that's it. That's the roundup for this week and a little bit of last week all thrown in one. Not as many as I thought, but I didn't hit all of the really small ones either. So I tapped out here at the end. You know what? News video next week. News video next week. You saw the Awaken Realms announcement of all their new games. You know your boy's going to have some hot takes on those, right? Oh, freaking yeah. And I have reviews. I'm behind on reviews, like I said. A couple of the ones as well coming from crowdfunding in March. And I'll probably have over the weekend, maybe Sunday or even Monday, just the top ones to be looking out for crowdfunding-wise in March as well. So maybe we'll do that in a separate video. Maybe we'll just throw that into the news video as a whole. We'll see. And how early can you announce a campaign, right? We saw it from Stonemaier announcing their retail Vantage way last year for sometime later this year. Awaken Realms announced one of their projects won't even be launching until 2026. Whoo! It's like when they announced the Arcs Digital situation, right? When they're like, hey, we're making Arcs Digital in 2026, but we're announcing it at the end of 2024. Right? Gotta get that hype drum rolling. Woo! That's all I got. I'm completely and utterly tapped out. It's been just exhausting so far doing mundane things since being sick. So it's going to be a good weekend to catch up, play some stuff, and get some stuff filmed, because I didn't film anything at all in like the last week and a half. So let me know what you want to see, and hopefully something out for you Patreon folks. I didn't forget about you, but like I said, I was under the weather. So we'll make it up to you this weekend. That's all I got. Stay classy. Have a great freaking fantastic day. Let me know what you think down below. Peace out.